we welcome you to be here. This is an honor because you are about to participate in the most highly prestigious award that Division 17 offers, and it's just an honor for us to sponsor this. Our introducer today is Ruth Passenger, who is going to be welcoming you as well. And she is the Dean of Professional Studies at the John F. Kennedy School. Ruth?
I'm going to talk really fast because I know Dr. Gilbert has a very exciting presentation, but I also want to tell you about her fabulousness. So, good afternoon. I'm humbled and delighted to be able to introduce Dr. Lucia Gilbert. She's been a role model, a mentor, and a friend to me for many years. Thank you for this honor of being here. I'd also like to welcome members of Dr. Gilbert's family, her husband Jack, her daughter Melissa. We're so glad you're here to join us in this celebration. And I hear that Jack is actually going to participate later. The crucible of life destroys us utterly, but some are purified and rise above this common pool of pain by vision, faith, and discipline to show the way for others. Let it be me to show, yet let me also humbly follow. These words by Richard Kramer are the citation for an award that Dr. Gilbert received in 2005 at a symposium in her honor. I start with these words because I think that they sum up beautifully the way that Dr. Gilbert has approached her career and her many accomplishments. She is a highly effective leader, but also a constant learner. She's a respected scholarly expert, but also a relentless explorer of new ideas and new areas of knowledge. She's a wise and cherished mentor, firmly guiding the way, but also an unwavering champion of other roads taken and other choices made. It is her courageous vision for a better world, her faith in and commitment to the growth of others, and her unshakable discipline and high standards that have brought her the success that we honor here today. I would also add, as a person who has written a biography, a chapter biography of Leona Tyler, that these are also precisely the qualities that were so often noted about the formidable Leona Tyler, in whose memory we confer this award, and who I am certain would be sitting here smiling broadly if she were with us today. Dr. Gilbert's educational background includes a BA from Wells College, summa cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa, and with distinction in chemistry. And pay attention because this will come up again later. I'm not permitted to say how. A Master of Science from Yale and a PhD from the University of Texas at Austin. She's currently Professor of Psychology and Professor of Counseling Psychology at Santa Clara University, having also served there as Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs for 4 years. Prior to her move to California, Dr. Gilbert enjoyed a 30-year career at UT Austin, where she served as Vice Provost of Undergraduate Studies, Director of the Center for Women's Studies, and as a Professor of Educational Psychology. A journey through Dr. Gilbert's vita reveals her prodigious output and the impact she's had on psychology. Her work is focused primarily on girls and women in the areas of development, gender processes, career development, technology, counseling and therapy, and work and family. Her pioneering feminist contributions in the work-family interface and dual-earner families have altered the way we think about women's and men's career development. She's authored 6 books, another's in progress that I bet she's going to tell you about. She's co-edited 4 more. She's authored hundreds of book chapters, refereed journal articles, monographs, and both invited and refereed presentations. She's had 18 significant grants funded and supervised 66 doctoral dissertations. She's served as a member of the editorial boards of 9 journals, including as an associate editor, and as a reviewer for another 10. She currently serves on the editorial review board for Imagination Press, which is APA's children's book arm that publishes books that help children cope with mental health related concerns. Dr. Gilbert has served on APA's Council of Representatives 3 times for 2 divisions, on the Board of Educational Affairs and the Publications and Communications Board, and as a site visitor 1 to 2 times per year since 1980, you do the math, for the Commission on Accreditation. Not surprisingly, Dr. Gilbert's list of honors and awards is extensive, and I highlight only a few here. She's a fellow in 3 divisions of APA, 9, 17, and 35, and also of the American Psychological Society. She's received the Strickland Daniel Distinguished Mentoring Award, the Carolyn Wood Sharif Award, and the Heritage Award in Graduate Teaching from Division 35. She's won the John Holland Award and the Elder Recognition Award from Division 17, and of course now the Leona Tyler Award. She's won awards from UT Austin for teaching, for supporting women in the natural sciences, for contributions to women's studies, for services to students with disabilities, and for leadership from the Hispanic Faculty Staff Association. The sheer scope and diversity of these awards, I think, illustrate nicely her enduring commitments to access, equity, and social justice. She also has won community awards, sat on community boards, and served her local communities with the same vigor and passion that she devotes to her professional work. The Leona Tyler Award citation acknowledges her distinguished career as a scholar, educator, clinician, academic administrator, and professional and community leader. But I want to end by highlighting the mentoring and collegial aspects of her career, because I think these are important contributions, also critically important ways of influencing our field. I wrote to former students of Dr. Gilbert soliciting comments about her impact on their lives and careers. The outpouring of gratitude and love that they sent back regarding her positive and lasting influence was enviable. I jokingly had written to them as AOLs, admirers of Lucia. But what I discovered is that they already have an established name for themselves, far more powerful than my feeble attempt at humor. They are Lucia's women and men, an identity that is important to them and that guides their daily lives in ways that are striking. Everything from feminist child rearing to navigating organizational politics to writing to teaching to exercise. Lucia was apparently an avid early morning dipper at a very cold spring-fed pool in Austin. They talk about the Lucia hug, which any of you who know Lucia have experienced, and her agility, flexibility, and capacity to be both mentor and friend. They describe Lucia as courageous, strong, compassionate, impossibly energetic, incisive, demanding, fiercely and inspiringly feminist, exasperating, patient, unwaveringly supportive, challenging, forgiving, insightful, open and loving, beautiful, extraordinary, a force of nature, and as their Shiro. Friends and colleagues, I present to you one of my Shiros, Dr. Lucia Gilbert.
Wow. So I'm so happy to be here. Ruth, what can I say? That was just amazing. Thank you. I am honored and pleased to be standing here today. I would like to begin by thanking my spouse Jack and my daughter Melissa for their belief in me, and my many dear colleagues with whom I have worked over the years for their friendship and guidance. I have a long list, especially Gail Hackett, Nancy Betts, Sam Ossipal, Melba Vasquez, Linda Forrest, Sherwin Davidson, Michael Toth, Mary Scher, and Ruth Fassinger. I also want to thank my many outstanding and hardworking students. I would not be here today without their support, their inspiration, and their sharing my passion for social justice. My comments on women pursuing careers then and now fall into 3 main parts. First, I provide some context for my own career beginnings as a way to reflect on women pursuing careers then, meaning the early 1970s. I next describe how this context came to illuminate important issues about women's development and women's careers addressed in my teaching, research, and administrative work. Third and finally, I provide a snapshot of my current research to reflect on women pursuing careers now. I begin with women pursuing careers in the early 1970s and my own pursuit of a career. I had the gift, as I now view it, of being gravely ill 2 years after Jack and I were married. I recall being in intensive care day after day and eventually striking a bargain with Saint Teresa, my patron saint. I was born Catholic, and I was born Italian and reared Catholic in an Italian family. I promised Saint Teresa that should I survive, I would do something, significant and important with my life. I'm here today, so obviously I survived. However, I had not a clue of what I would actually do to live up to my part of the bargain. But I did know that it would involve pursuing a career that I had yet to discern in attempting to make a positive difference in the world. Context is often crucial to career paths and to the research undertaken. The times in which one lives often prompt the burning questions and make visible what may have remained invisible or seemed impossible to change for those who had come before. I was ill in the late 1960s, a time of significant societal turmoil and social change. The civil rights movement, the passage of the Voting Rights Act, the assassination of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, the second wave of the feminist movement, and attempts to pass Title IX were all central to the societal turmoil and monumental social change. At the time I became ill and negotiated my agreement with St. Teresa, I had been teaching chemistry at a private residential high school with an excellent academic reputation. I greatly enjoyed my students and found myself increasingly concerned about how the societal changes of the late 1960s were affecting them. Being by far the youngest teacher at the school at that time, and one who was approachable and willing to listen, I became the person students often came to with their concerns. These experiences led to my enrolling in a doctoral program in counseling psychology at UT Austin in 1969. I had the good fortune to take classes and work with Janet Spence, who at the time was just beginning her highly influential work on gender. One day after class, she asked if I would be willing to assist in a study she was designing. Of course, I said yes. I got to role play the competent woman in the videotape vignette that Spence used in her groundbreaking study, Who Likes Competent Women? As Janet later wrote, the outcomes of the study were so intriguing that she became hooked on gender research for the remainder of her career. So did I. I continued life as a graduate student, and in 1973 was nearing the completion of my dissertation. Jack and I discussed our possible next steps as a couple and decided that we would be flexible in how we would move forward with our two careers. In April of that year, I accepted my first academic position at Iowa State University, and we agreed to enter into a long-distance marriage in which I would live and pursue my career in Ames, Iowa, and Jack his at the University of Texas in Austin. Putting our decision to commute long distance and live together but apart into an historical context, 1973 was 1 year after the first issue of Ms., the liberal feminist magazine, was published. It was 4 years since the British researchers Rhonda and Robert Rappaport first used the term dual career family And they used it to describe what they considered to be an unusual and quote-unquote revolutionary type of dual-wage heterosexual family emerging as a result of complex social changes. The term revolutionary referred to the dual-career family's apparent inconsistency with respect to traditional notions of gender. In these families, the woman and the man both pursued lifelong careers relatively uninterrupted and also established and developed a family life together that often included children. Male partners in these families appeared less defined by the traditional good provider role long associated with male privilege and male power. Jack and I embraced the Rappaport's vision of dual-career marriages in our personal lives. Our decision to live apart for 1 year and then consider our next steps was consistent with this vision. On the last day of our commuting lifestyle in August 1974, with pen and paper in hand, Jack and I went into separate rooms to reflect and write about what that year had been like for each of us, the joys and traumas, the ups and downs. We will now share excerpts of what we wrote those many years ago to help frame the then of women pursuing careers in the early 1970s. These reflections also foreshadow directions of my subsequent research. Before reading our excerpts, I should note that Jack moved to Ames, Iowa in August 1974. We had agreed that we would both remain at Iowa State in Ames for at least the next year. So now I'm going to read an excerpt from my account as of August 1974. I suppose one could call our recent lifestyle one of remote parenthood. I live in one city and work at the major university there. My husband is a professor at a different university in a different city and state, a major commute away. Our daughter lived with her dad until she was 5 months old, and then with me until now, 7 months old. The past year has been exciting and rewarding in many, many ways. It also has been emotionally trying and lonely. The beginning was sudden. I was about to complete my PhD in psychology at the same university in which my husband was now tenured. I decided that my career opportunities could not be limited to that one city. I knew I had a good chance of obtaining academic positions elsewhere, and that the opportunities for an academic position where we now lived was extremely limited. My husband supported my decision, and I proceeded to apply for positions outside our present locale with the proviso that each of the universities I selected also had a good department in my husband's field, chemistry, to allow for a possible future move on his part. The stars were aligned, and I found just the job I wanted, and there were future possibilities there for Jack as well. This was April 1973, and the appointment was for September. I continued to work fiercely on my dissertation and to feel very excited about the future. In June, I discovered that I was pregnant, a shock to both Jack and me. Yes, I had wanted to have a child someday. In fact, we had tried unsuccessfully to have a child during the 2 years I was finishing up on my doctoral degree. Subsequently, we had decided to postpone things for a few years and had gone back to using birth control, a stratagem that nature had now effectively countered. But now was not the time to have a child. Psychologically, I was prepared to go off on my own. Abortion, perhaps an obvious solution, did not fit for us. We knew all along that we desired a child. We decided to be flexible and to go on ahead with our career decisions as planned. I would take a leave of absence for the month of January, the month when the baby was due. I would then commute back to Austin, where Jack and our baby would remain. I would commute every 10 days for a 4-day weekend. The pregnancy in no way interfered with my work, and to the contrary, I think it had many positive effects, especially as a modeling experience to female undergraduate and graduate students, and perhaps even for my male colleagues and students. Time flew. From the moment of birth, our daughter Melissa was alert, happy, and delightful. Leaving her was incredibly difficult. My husband made me set a day to go as planned and to make plane reservations. 3 weeks after her birth, I left for the first time and cried the entire way back to Iowa. On returning to work the next day, I was greeted with tremendous warmth by my graduate students and the younger members of the faculty and staff. So that's the end of my excerpt. Jack had his own experiences during that year.
This is an excerpt from my contribution to the journal written again in August of 1974. I have long held the belief that we as a society waste a significant component of our total potential by hewing to the conventional view that women, first and foremost, are housekeepers and mothers, only secondarily accepting the non-traditional possibility of their potential as professionals. What or who planted the seed of this belief in me is not clear, but the belief has remained strong, even in the face of innumerable arguments with many male acquaintances who, for whatever reasons, prefer the more traditional functions of women in our culture. Consistent with this belief, I encouraged my wife in her efforts to pursue a professional career, doing so even before we were married. A major question, however, was just what kind of career would be the most fulfilling for her. A PhD degree in the field of counseling psychology, a field in which she appeared to excel, was the entirely unexpected upshot of her teaching career in chemistry. Suffice it to say that I was very unsure about the soundness of our decision, with all its possible ramifications, and my uncertainty increased greatly when we learned that my wife was pregnant with our first child. My situation would be changed, to be sure, but nearly not so dramatically as hers. The possibility seemed great that she would not be able to handle all of the new stresses, but although I think we both recognized that our experiment might be a spectacular bust, we did not verbalize our doubts. More than once, we came close to throwing in the towel. However, the most difficult soul-searching of all occurred when it came time for her to leave our 3-week-old baby, Melissa, with me and resume her career far from home. Once again, it was she and not I who had to bear by far the greater burden emotionally. The decision whether or not to return now seemed entirely hers. I guess it is a measure of her own recognition of her strengths, both personal and professional, that she did again undertake the continuing style of living that was now so painfully familiar to both of us. Looking in retrospect at our total experience, I'm glad that we attempted it and that I was able to support her needs. We both learned a lot about how much we give to one another and how this sustains our ability to continue on our seemingly separate professional tracks. Living through the emotional swings of the past year gave us a new strength and somehow instilled a feeling that we can survive almost anything, although the road ahead promises to be rocky. We will continue to struggle with our ambitions and finding positions to our liking in the same locale. Overall, though, one could not have hoped for a more positive outcome.
Although our experiences living apart those many years ago were uniquely personal, they turned out to be highly consistent with subsequent research. First, we wanted our relationship to survive, and we took steps that we hoped would ensure that eventuality. We did this at a time when there were very few social supports for doing so. As can be seen from the next slide, taken from Life magazine, the roles of many women at that time, particularly white middle-class women, were quite different than today. The next slide on women and men in the workforce there and now show that overall many fewer women were employed in 1975 than today. Among married women with children under the age of 6, 38% were employed in 1975 in comparison to 64% today. Still in the future for women pursuing careers were the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, laws prohibiting sexual harassment and sex discrimination, the Family and Medical Leave Act, and the development of work-family policies. Second, my husband shared with me in addressing my needs for independence and making it on my own. As a later research makes abundantly clear, having a supportive male spouse is a key factor in succeeding in the kind of revolutionary heterosexual dual-career family described by the Rappaports. Third and finally, I wanted to be successful. When I interviewed for the position at Iowa State University, I sensed that there was a good fit. Unlike interviews at other universities, no one had raised an obvious eyebrow about my planned interstate commute. Once there, my colleagues were quite supportive and friendly, and a number of graduate students showed an interest in my research. Had I been at a different university, I may not have been as successful. As later research indicates, a supportive work environment is crucial for women's career success. It is reassuring to know that our experiences were consistent with subsequent research findings. Jack was correct, however, when he said, "The road ahead promises to be rocky." It was quite rocky, but things worked out after a few years for both of us at the University of Texas at Austin when I was offered a tenure-track position. Turning now to the second part of my comments. As I noted earlier, the times in which one lives often make visible what may have remained invisible or seemed impossible to change. When I began my academic career in 1973, relatively few women in counseling psychology held academic positions at major research universities. Naomi Mira, Lenore Harmon, and Jo Ida Hansen were among these few. Leona Tyler had retired from the University of Oregon 2 years earlier and was completing her term as the president of APA, only the fourth woman elected to this important office since the association was established in the late 19th century. Given this reality and my own feminist convictions, factors affecting women's career development and women's career pathways became an early and continuing focus of my research. As Simone de Beauvoir had noted, one is not born, but rather becomes a woman or a man within a particular cultural context and historical period. Societal discourses about what it means to be a woman or a man are central to visions for our adult roles. Such discourses or stories communicate to us what is thinkable for ourselves and others, what is possible, and what is doable. I was fortunate to have agreed to role-play the competent woman in Janet Spence's study and to be introduced to alternate ways of thinking about gender. In my coursework in graduate school, I was studying theories that tied women's roles and attributes to their biology. In contrast, Spence was challenging these theories. She was interested in investigating cultural assumptions and stereotypes about the sexes and how they get reproduced in the discourses and practices of a society. These contemporary gender theories guided and informed my work with colleagues and students over these many years. My graduate students have always been a priority in my professional life. I was fortunate first at Iowa State and later at UT Austin to involve so many talented young women and men in research that we all agreed mattered. 66 students completed their dissertation under my supervision or co-supervision. Many of these students and other interested graduate and undergraduate students participated on my research teams, worked as my teaching assistant, shared authorship on publications, and participated in conference presentations. In this research, we pursued questions associated with a range of feminist topics. Today, I very briefly mention research undertaken in one area, women's career development. In this context, I had the pleasure of meeting Leona Tyler in 1980. I was invited to present at the Symposium on Women Pathfinders in Psychology and Counseling held at the University of Oregon that year. My title was entitled Dual Career Families, Salient Conflicts and Styles of Coping. Not a surprise choice of topic, I suppose. I mentioned in my talk at Oregon that for the field to move forward, we needed to develop reliable and valid instruments to assess phenomena associated with women's and men's changing roles and self-views. Listed on the next slide are some of the instruments we developed to address questions of interest in our research. First, given the emerging reality of the same individual engaging in both work and family roles, we developed scales for assessing role conflict. These were followed by instruments to assess strategies for coping with role conflict. Views of the parental role were also changing and led to our developing the PPRS, a measure of women's and men's perceptions of parental role responsibilities. Finally, to assess young adults' views of what is thinkable with regard to work and family, we developed the OOFI, a measure of young adults' orientations to occupational family integration. All of these instruments are still widely used today. One particular focus in my research was investigating some of the external or structural factors influencing women's career development. Topics of study included mentoring, attitudes about women's abilities and roles, and workplace policies. I will go back to this area of focus a bit later in my talk. A second important focus was the use of more diverse populations in studies of dual earner families. For example, we studied role conflict in same-sex and heterosexual families, we studied coping strategies in Hispanic and African American families, and we studied patterns of role sharing in both working class and higher income dual earner families. My professional life took an unexpected turn in 1994 when my arm was twisted to, quote unquote, take my turn as director of the Women's Studies program at UT Austin. The program had continued along for a number of years with very few resources and no space. I was the only full professor associated with the program who apparently had not taken her turn. Although I had chaired some university committees, I had absolutely no interest in academic administration. Little did I know where this arm twisting might take me. As director, I would have a 1/4-time administrative assistant, and if the department would fund it, a 1-course reduction. Soon after I was appointed, a senior colleague suggested that we meet with the then dean and provost to see if more support for women's studies might be forthcoming. In the meeting, the provost made it abundantly clear that he sought no value in women's studies. The answer was an unequivocal no. I was totally taken aback by his lack of vision, but on further reflection, I realized that circumstances had given me an opportunity. Thank you, St. Teresa. As was my custom, I immediately involved my graduate students in my vision for the program and in the research we needed to conduct and the grants that we needed to obtain. Making visible obstacles to women's careers and what was needed for women's success would be center stage. We started with women in science, engineering, and computer science, as the need at that time seemed greatest there. We conducted our own version of the MIT study on the status of women faculty in science and organized a symposium to which we invited the university president and provost to discuss the findings. In addition, a female colleague in the physics department and I co-taught a successful interdisciplinary course for women graduate students in the physical sciences and engineering. In addition to focusing on the students' research, the course introduced students to the concept of structural barriers to career success, including the notions of healthy and toxic mentoring. In brief, within 5 years, we had established a vibrant university-wide center of women's and gender studies, which remains strong today. At the time, Jack and I were seriously considering accepting academic positions at another university. But the earlier arm twisting was pulling in another direction. I was offered still another leadership position, Vice Provost for Undergraduate Studies at UT Austin. After much discussion, Jack and I decided to stay. I took the position, and here again I immediately involved my students, but this time in initiatives to improve undergraduate education and strengthen undergraduate research, especially for first-generation college students. This was followed by still another leadership position, Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs at Santa Clara University in California, a primarily undergraduate Jesuit university committed to social justice. Just before leaving UT Austin for Santa Clara, I celebrated and honored my many students over the years by organizing a working conference entitled Cross-Generational Mentoring, Ethics, Feminist Principles, and Professional Development. The conference brought together main themes of my research and involved many of my former students as the main presenters. Some of those attending the symposium are shown in the next slide. These were exciting and important years marked by increased opportunities for women and men to both love and work. As was discussed at the Cross-Generational Symposium, however, challenges remain. An example is the topic to which I now turn as the third and closing part of my remarks today, and the topic that addresses the now in my presentation title. My current research closes the circle of my career trajectory and returns me to my first love, research on gender equity and social justice. After my having devoted many years, more years than I care to count, part-time or full-time, to university leadership. It also represents a developmental move from living in a dual career marriage to embarking on a dual career research project with my spouse, Jack. Jack and I have always loved good wine. When we relocated to Santa Clara University, which is close to the wine country, the proximity to good wine was a definite plus. Little did I know that this circumstance would result in an important research project. It started, of course, with my interest in women's careers. Winemaking, a traditionally male-dominated field, requires education in viticulture, which is the culture of grapes, and enology, which is the science that deals with wine and winemaking. In addition to a strong background in agriculture and science, being a winemaker requires physical strength, creativity, mentorship, internship experiences, and the ability to drive a forklift. From all that I had read, women had successfully shattered the glass ceiling in this traditionally male-dominated field. I was curious about how this remarkable change had come about. I designed a study in which I would first conduct interviews with a subset of winemakers. I would then use themes from the interviews to design a larger study focused on factors associated with bringing about gender equity. What I had not considered in developing my research plan was any difficulty in locating female participants. However, when I visited various wineries and asked about possibly meeting with the winemaker, invariably I learned that the winemaker was a man. When I followed up with the question, do you know of any wineries in this area where the winemaker is a woman? Time and again, the response was, women winemakers. I'm sure there are some, but I just don't know of any. These consistent experiences convinced me that a far more important focus for my research was to identify the women winemakers and to make their contributions more visible. Jack agreed, and our joint research project was launched. This has been a very challenging and time-intensive area to research. Today, I will describe very briefly our first steps and some findings to date. The first step, as you may have guessed, was to find the women winemakers. We developed a comprehensive list of California wineries together with the name and sex of the lead or principal winemaker. there are more than 3,400 wineries in California. So this turned out to be a challenging task that took nearly a year to complete. We have now compiled the most comprehensive and accurate information currently available on California wineries and their lead winemakers. Using this database, we documented that 9.8% of the lead winemakers in California are women, so approximately 10%. We were surprised by these findings. So was the wine industry, which, as I mentioned, assumed a shattered glass ceiling with many wineries having women as their lead winemaker. Adding to the surprise was the fact that half of the students in the top enology and viticulture programs in the state are women, and this had been the case since the mid-1990s. The findings made national and international news, which was quite gratifying given our overarching goal of illuminating the contributions of California women winemakers. Commenting on our research, Letty Teague wrote in her Wall Street Journal column on wine, quote, "There are many well-known women winemakers in California, Heidi Barrett, Helen Turley, and Zelma Long, to name a few. So it would seem as if the so-called glass ceiling had been pretty well shattered, enologically speaking. Alas, it turns out to be more perception than fact." End of quote. The second step in making the women winemakers and their contributions more visible was to develop and launch the website Women Winemakers of California, www.womenwinemakers.com. A screenshot of the home page appears on this slide. The website also includes bioprofiles and photos of the California women winemakers. The next slide shows the bioprofile and photo of Zelma Long, one of the first women winemakers in California and one of the only 2 women winemakers to date to be elected to the Vintners Hall of Fame. In developing the bioprofiles for the website, we sought out and included information about families. We did this purposefully. We wanted to counter another misperception in the wine industry, that women who want to be winemakers must choose between family and career. We also use the website to share the results of our ongoing research and to provide links to information about women winemakers globally. All the studies mentioned today are posted on the website. We use Google Analytics to track hits to the site and are pleased that the site receives numerous hits each day. The third and final step I wanted to mention today concerns a possible explanation for the discrepancy between perception and fact regarding California women winemakers having shattered the glass ceiling, a discrepancy noted by Letty Teague in her Wall Street Journal column. We decided to first look at winery acclaim as a possible explanation. Perhaps the wineries where women craft their wines are more highly regarded proportional to their representation in the field. And it is this winery acclaim that has become associated with the perception that there are many more women winemakers than there actually are. We used Opus Vino, a widely cited and credible source of winery quality, to identify acclaimed wineries in California. In support of our hypothesis, we found that proportional to their representation in our comprehensive database of California wineries and their lead winemakers, a significantly higher percentage of wineries with women winemakers were listed in Opus Vino in comparison with wineries having male winemakers. Specifically, 23% of the California wineries with women winemakers were listed in Opus Vino as compared to 14% of wineries with male winemakers. Again, our study received positive attention. The findings were widely reported in newspapers around the country and also featured in an Associated Press article. I don't know if you know how much you know about AP, but that's really big. The next slide shows a happy woman winemaker, Kathy Corson. She's the petite person standing next to Jack, whose winery is listed in Opus Vino. She was the woman winemaker featured in the Associated Press article. Kathy received her degree from the University of California, Davis in the early 1970s, and along with Zelma Long, is one of the pioneering women in the field. In the article, Kathy is quoted as saying, quote, "It's very gratifying to see the hard work and tenacity of so many talented women recognized. It's been a long and bumpy road." Particularly meaningful was an email I received from Zelma Long, the woman winemaker whose bio profile and photo were shown earlier. She said, quote, "Please know that I think the work you are doing is so important to women in the wine industry. It raises their profile and provides an independent professional resource for journalists and others. I believe it will have a long-term positive impact for women and perhaps be a template for research on women in other fields. We are all better off for the scholarly research you have done. Data is so important." End of quote. Where we are now in our research is continuing our conversations with a cross-section of California winemakers, women and men, to better understand the factors associated with women's career success, as well as identifying other sources of evidence for the quality of the wines produced by women winemakers. Evidence of wine quality is particularly important for young winemakers seeking sponsorship and support from venture capitalists. To close this last part of my address, I want to acknowledge the many remarkable women we have met in conducting this research. Winemaking may be a much newer field for women to pursue than an academic career in counseling psychology, but in both these fields, the pioneering women likely needed to be exceptional. Leona Tyler, of course, comes to mind here. Before concluding and to close the loop, our daughter Melissa is now herself in an academic position and is living in a dual career marriage with 2 young children. I take great pleasure in her successes and in our relationship, and I hope that her growing up in a role-sharing dual career family has provided her with a strong foundation for her own life. Throughout these many years, from the then, this is the hardest paragraph for me, from the then of my career beginnings as an assistant professor in what the Rappaports had described as a revolutionary kind of 2-career family, to the now of my joint research on the careers of women winemakers with Jack, I have tried to stay focused on issues of social justice in my teaching, in my research, and in my work as a university leader. I think I can say that I have done something important and significant with my life. But St. Teresa, I have not done yet.